Have you ever wondered what happens when entrepreneurship, environmental sustainability and venture capital collide? If so, you're like me, and you're in the right place. Welcome to The Green Adventure. On the show, you'll learn from the critical insights of both founders and investors alike. Not random advice or generic guides, but real stories born out of their experience with genuine climate action. We aspire to create a network of people collaborating to build the green economy, accelerating us towards this critical target of net zero emissions. I'm your host and founder of the show, Jake Woodhouse. For all the notes, links and episodes, please visit www.greenadventure.com. Take care when typing that in. Adventure is spelt with a double D. Thank you for listening and enjoy the episode. In this episode, we speak to James Johnston, founder and CEO of Piclo. Piclo develops software to make our electricity grids smart, flexible and sustainable. Learn how critical it is to begin your startup focused on a specific problem, how seeking investment from the right people at the right time is key, and how sometimes a pivot is the best way forwards. This is a great story, born out of academic dreams and now delivering real value in the race to the green economy. In particular, I love listening to James's bold vision of the future energy system. Enjoy. Hi James, welcome on the show. Please can you start off by giving us a high-level summary of your current role?
I'm the CEO and co-founder of Piclo, and as any other founder should know, that means I do pretty much most things, from commercial discussions, strategy, fundraising, team operations, other financial things. Pretty much the only thing I don't do these days is actually do any coding, which is probably a good thing, to be honest.
Great, thanks, James. And as an initial question, I'd love to start off at the problem or the pain point that it is you're trying to solve. So please can you talk us through how you came across this problem or what the problem is you're trying to focus on?
So I'll actually start slightly differently because we made the mistake of not starting with a problem, but we started with a solution. And that solution, broadly speaking, was to come up with the Internet of Energy, which is quite a big idea. And that translated into developing a peer-to-peer energy trading platform. And the problem was that the solution we built, we weren't quite clear what problem it was solving. And we went in basically in hunt of a problem. And therefore, the first product effectively wasn't a complete success. Therefore, we've had to sort of go through quite a long pivot away from that into what we're doing now. In this approach, we took a lot of learning from the peer-to-peer. One, essentially, don't start with technology, don't start with a solution, start with people, start with understanding who is going to be using it, what their problems are, and how you can help them and basically do their jobs or get on with their lives in an easier and better way. And yeah, so that's effectively the big lesson that we've had. And just talking a little bit about what the new product is.
Thank you, James. What an interesting initial insight into how important it is to focus on a real problem. I'd like to take a step back slightly and understand the personal journey that you've really been on. So perhaps you could explain a little bit more about how you first got into the energy space and what it was that got you interested in working in this area and the steps you've taken to go about that.
So we're in the wider decentralized energy space. And in that ecosystem, we focus on something called flexibility. So flexibility is essentially the ability for assets such as batteries, electric cars, demand-side response, generators, to shift when they consume or produce energy to different times. And that flexibility actually has, when delivered to the system, creates a lot of value. So, for example, if there is too much wind being generated at one part of the grid, it creates congestion issues. And either the wind generator has to be turned off or they start having voltage issues. And eventually they might need to reinforce or build a bigger network to deal with that longer term. Neither of these solutions are great, but if you apply flexibility to the problem, what you get is a much more efficient way of utilizing more of the wind resource and more of the existing grid in a smarter, more flexible way. So in that wider concept of flexibility, we have developed a marketplace for buying and selling flexibility services. And the buyers of flexibility in the first instance are the distribution network operators themselves, the DNOs. They can place a value on, as I said, avoiding unnecessary reinforcement works when they can essentially set up a flexibility contract with someone that owns and operates a battery to provide the type of response they need when they have areas of congestion on their network. So our marketplace, plays like all sort of online marketplaces, has some key functions. First of all, it's around visibility. In this case, the DNO is the first one to provide that visibility. So they declare that they have a need and they can articulate and signpost this need on our Piclo Flex marketplace. And then secondly, the owners and operators of these flexible assets, they can then respond and then also provide visibility on when they have their assets. And then the final thing that we do is run auction service so that the flex providers can actually win some of these contracts and provide these services to the grid, which, as I said, is, overarching goal is to create a smarter, more flexible energy system. Sure. It does come back to this concept of the Internet of Energy. Before, the Piclo used to be called Open Utility, so that was what we founded. So before Open Utility was founded in 2013, I was doing research at the University of Strathclyde, attempting to do and complete a PhD, but never quite got it over the line. That PhD research was focused on a similar area. It was looking at direct current microgrids. And sort of part of my wider research into this space, I realized I didn't know that much about some of the big concepts of sustainability. So I decided to sort of educate myself, learn all about, what are the big challenges the world's facing. And actually, at the end of that, quite depressed by what I was reading, because there didn't seem to be clear narrative for how we're going to solve some of these huge problems. And I kind of stayed in that sort of state of not quite sure with, where we're going as society, asking big societal questions, until I came across a talk by a chap called Bob Metcalfe. And the talk was called the Enernet. And essentially, Bob was one of the inventors of the Ethernet protocol and also a successful entrepreneur and venture capitalist. He essentially embodies the internet, the development of the internet. He literally built it with the Ethernet. He gave a great talk at the Singularity University, which is a great institution in itself, about how we need to take lessons from the success of the internet and how it transformed communication and apply that same philosophy, generally speaking, to the energy sector. And this was something, talk was from 2009. This is going back 10 years now. And I got a lot of inspiration from that. Based on, we need to think more bold because, instead of sort of retracting in our steps and worrying and saying we need less and we actually need to be talking about doing more and investing more and having a grander vision for how this energy system can be. And that's where it really came from. So I did start with a very high level thought of how can I help? I play a part in building the Internet of Energy, and incorporated a company and set off boldly to do that. And there's a certain level of naivety that you need to do something like that. But one of the most important things that I did early on was realize that I couldn't do this alone. I needed to have a founding team with me. And I spent a while basically being busy, going to events in this space. Clean Web was one of the sort of meetups I used to go to. And in one of those that I met my co-founder, Andy, or who became the co-founder of the business. And Andy has much more of a software technical background than I did. And so I knew that was going to be an essential component. And the two of us, we basically got cracking with trying to code the Internet of Energy. And it was only after a couple of months where Andy mentioned, what problem are we trying to solve here? We knew the big problem that we were trying to solve, transforming the entire energy system to a decentralized one. But in terms of who was actually going to buy this was a difficult one. So that's when we realized that we needed another co-founder to join, and that's turned out to be Alice. Alice has a design background, and effectively a good designer starts with the people, starts with their needs and understands what problems. And Alice brought that refreshing sort of different approach, which, we've taken basically our approach to solving problems now And yeah, so we then started really trying to find the first practical implementation of Internet of Energy, and that brought us down to thinking about a peer-to-peer energy system where you wouldn't need to buy your energy from a traditional supplier, but you could buy it from your neighbor's solar panels. As a concept, it's very neat and intuitive, but the reality is the rules of the system don't really accommodate that. And that was what we had to basically pivot away from. It wasn't that the idea wasn't necessarily good in a completely, if we had a fresh start for how the energy system would work, you would probably start there. But the thing that we learned over the first couple of years is the energy system is heavily regulated. There's a lot of interest from government, and there are certain things you can and cannot do. And peer-to-peer energy is one of those things you cannot do. So it took a while to really find that out definitively, but we did. And it was off the back of that we then we became basically in the process of building something that fundamentally couldn't really work. We learned a lot about the energy sector, and it was only with that knowledge that we actually managed to find the opportunity or see the opportunity that we're now focusing on.
So much to really reflect on there. You use many terms that those working in the space we're familiar with, such as pivot. It's important to be agile, and it's the one real kind of superpower that a startup actually has. And yeah, it's fascinating to hear you on the other side of having taken that decision as a young business to focus on a different product. And I'm sure we'll learn more about it as the conversation continues. But an area I'd love to get your insights on is really around the team. So you mentioned teaming up with co-founders and the process of finding other like-minded people that want to work with you. Please, can you talk a little bit around how important talent is and what it means to you to build a team?
Yeah, so the early days of company, you make some pretty existential decisions. Who are your co-founders going to be? Who are you going to embark on a journey with? And these are, at the time, they don't seem that big because the total age of your company is about 2 weeks old or 3 weeks old. And I literally incorporated the company in my bedroom, on my computer in my bedroom. I think actually I wouldn't recommend doing that. I think I'd recommend using an accountant for any future reference. But that's what I did. But and you're like, okay, well, let's just divvy up this company. Let's embark on this journey. Give it a go. We'll give it 6 months. Then if it doesn't work out, we'll go our separate ways. That's the sort of attitude you have. But if you have found something which will endure, which obviously we've been around for now over 6 years. It's fascinating how quick you can make some of these decisions that then, have huge impact. So, and I think it's very hard to do like a what if, because, what if I didn't work with these guys, with some other guys? Would that change where the company would go? It's impossible to really do that because so much of our company's identity is basically the collective people in it, and the founders have a very big impression on that, but also employees as well. Early employees have a big impact on not just the culture of the company, but on what we end up focusing on because of experience, because of specific passions or things that drive us. So effectively what this is that it's an organic, evolving, moving thing, this company, made up of it, essentially it's made up of its people. And it's almost a statement of who we are and what we believe in.
I personally have met so many amazing people working in this sector, and it's absolutely true. The team members are integral to everything you ever build and the companies that you work with. Moving on to an incredibly important part of this podcast, and that is the investment piece. So we wouldn't be a VC and a startup-focused podcast had we not talked about that. Could you share with us some of the insights you've gained from the investment conversations or investment friends that you've made over the years? The relationship between investor and entrepreneur is critical to the success of startups, and really interesting to hear you talk about the timing and how important it is to have the right investor at the right stage of your business's development.
I think the first point is there are different investors for different stages, and you can cause a lot of stress by trying to go after the wrong investor at that particular stage. So for us, the first investor was Bethnal Green Ventures. That was, their first 6 months, and they go super early. So they like basically taking quite a big risk, But because they're so mission driven, they're like, do I want to see this company existing? Is it good for the world? But they basically take quite a bit of a punt on their investments. I say though that it's very, very popular. So there's probably harder to get into Bethnal Green Ventures than it was back in the day. But yeah, they're like an incubator, accelerator program. And that was perfect for what we needed at that time. We were very young and fresh, full of energy, not necessarily focusing on the right things. That was definitely what we needed. We've got a lot of support from grants from the government over the years as well. That's a different form of investment, not equity investment, but it's financial and it's backing from the government. It gives you time to test out things. And that was the next step for us, was to get some of these grants in place from the government, also from private sources. Enernet Trust gave us some money as well. Only after about 2 years, I think we were ready for angel investment. And what I mean by ready is we knew enough about what we were doing. Still ultimately we're very early stage and there was huge risk. And ultimately we have pivoted away from that original model I mentioned. But still we were ready and we started with our first angel investment round. And this was just a handful of angels that we either met or we had known from our previous contacts. And then since 2015 and now, or the last round, which was the Green Angel Syndicate round last year, we've raised around about £1.4 million. I wouldn't describe fundraising as, from our experience, being very straightforward and neat process. I probably spent a lot of my time over the last 3 or 4 years doing investment and closing mini rounds when we had a critical mass of investors at each stage, rather than just having 1 or 2 investment raises. It was actually a whole series of mini rounds. So that's what has been appropriate for us. The Green Angel money was very good because instead of spending a lot of time with one individual investor and then receiving one medium-sized check, let's say 25 or 50K, you put the same amount of effort, maybe a little bit more, but then you get a collective group of angels that rely on that due diligence. So it's actually a very efficient process. And I think that was a very good experience from our side. I think going forward, we're really keen to look at how we can get institutional money.
Moving on from that, James, I'd love to talk through the mission. It's very obvious, speaking to you, the passion that you have for this space, and back at your university days, the overarching goal that you had about the internet of energy. I'd love to talk through the current project and Piclo, how that relates to mission, and with that as well, the impact that you hope to have. So how important the mission of the business is, and ultimately, if your business is successful, the impact you might have will be. In terms of the amount of infrastructure investment that isn't required due to a software platform, just like what you were building. It makes one wonder what other opportunities are out there that are similar, where you start to solve real requirements that the green economy needs now, and investing and building those businesses today is critical for the future.
Yeah. So we're a mission-driven organization, so this is very much front and center our minds. Our mission is to decarbonize the global economy. So it gives you a hint that we're thinking big and beyond just the UK. We share this mission with a large and growing number of people, which is great because it's not just going to be one company that makes this happen. There's a whole series of different companies that need to share that vision. There might be competing companies, but even if they share the vision, then they're competing to make the right thing happen. But it's just that idea that everyone has got that, especially in the energy system and working in the energy system, having that in their minds and why they get up in the morning. And our role in that, it's all around the marketplaces. So in order to get to a point where we have, whether it's 100% renewables or 90% renewables and 10% nuclear or whatever, we're technically agnostic really on that point. We do know that we need to get to a system which is radically different than it is now. And that system needs a marketplace or marketplaces that can facilitate the hugely more complexity that needs to be managed when you have millions and millions, potentially even 1 billion different generators and smart devices and cars. So these, batteries on wheels, effectively a generator and also could be a consumer, and it moves around. So it's quite a complex ecosystem we're talking about, and you need a very different type of marketplace that can facilitate all these transactions. And that's what we're trying to build. So it's definitely a journey. It's one of the challenges we have in terms of measuring impact is because we are focusing on systemic change. We're not just focusing on one particular user group or one type of specific problem. We're talking about shifting $2.2 trillion a year industry, so it's a big thing. And how do we feel comfortable we're making progress? I think we do need to have metrics that we can measure. And the two ones that we are measuring are cost. So are we reducing the cost for consumers? And why does that relate to decarbonization? I think it's fundamental that we do transform the energy system, but don't end up doubling up our costs. I think we need to do this in an affordable and an efficient way. So that's really important. The second metric we look at is how much more new renewables can be connected to the grid, or how much, essentially another version of that, how much electric cars can be connected to the grid, essentially displacing combustion cars, that we can somewhat sort of directly attribute to because of our marketplace existing. So those are the sort of couple of the metrics that we can look at and we can measure. We can see if we're making progress. Change is slow in the energy system. So, we are 6 years old, but we're only really, with the big pivot, we're only really getting started with the traction in the last couple of months, really. We had the first auction be completed on the platform, and to give you a sense of the scale, so that around about £450,000 of flexibility contracts were awarded via our auction. And to give you a sense of that, essentially saves or defers the need to invest, conservative estimate, £7 million of actual infrastructure. So you're replacing expensive infrastructure. It's starting, we're starting to get some data, and I think of actually making an impact that can be directly attributed to us. But I think there's also the indirect stuff is huge as well. So if we can be seen as a leader and creating white papers and moving the conversation forward, that inspires others to do the same and to develop similar solutions, other solutions, and that has a big impact as well.
Well, James, that was a great moment to finish on, and thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate having you on the show. Thank you.
Have a good weekend. Bye now.
That was The Green Adventure. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, then please help us out by sharing this episode with your networks and rating us on the platform wherever you may listen in from. For any questions at all, we'd love to hear from you, so please reach out on social media or email. Whether you're wondering about a technical term that's been discussed, would like an intro to a guest from the show, or even perhaps feature yourselves, we're here to help. My Twitter handle is @JakeWoodhouse, spelled as it sounds but drop the final E. My email, jake@greenadventure.com. Remember, that's ad spelt with 2 Ds. Finally, for the notes, links and episodes that will be coming, visit www.greenadventure.com. Remember, that's ad with a double D. Until next time, we'll be back soon. Thank you and goodbye.